was 2:41 a.m. on December 4, 2025, when the impossible became reality. 4 Ukrainian drones, each costing less than a luxury car, were about to pierce what Russia called an impenetrable shield and prove that the future of warfare isn't measured in billions, but in bytes, algorithms, and raw audacity. At Kacha Air Base in northwestern Crimea, the Russian MiG-29 with tail number Red 24 had just touched down after a 3-hour sortie. Its mission? Striking Ukrainian civilians in residential areas near Novozerne, north of Kherson, a region repeatedly targeted by Russian air raids. The 2 pilots climbed down from the cockpit, relaxed, perhaps even celebratory. Their aircraft sat on the apron, engines still glowing white-hot, radiating intense heat from the long mission. They had no idea that their fighter, worth over $30 million, would never fly again, because 370 miles away, over the dark waters of the Black Sea, 4 UJ-25 Skyline drones were already closing in. These weren't random strikes or lucky shots. This was insane precision warfare, a revenge operation planned by Ukraine's HUR intelligence unit and executed with surgical accuracy that would make NATO analysts stop and take notes. The mission parameters were brutally simple. Find the MiG-29 that just bombed Ukrainian civilians, destroy it. Then, blind Russia's radar eyes by taking out the Irtish SQ surveillance system near Simferopol, a radar specifically designed to detect exactly this type of low-altitude threat. 2 targets, nearly 37 miles apart, both deep inside what Moscow considered a safe zone. For more than 370 miles, these 4 drones had flown in complete radio silence, skimming barely above the waves at speeds exceeding 370 mph. Built from carbon fiber and fiberglass with virtually no metallic surfaces, each UJ-25 had a radar cross-section less than 10% of a conventional fighter jet. To Russian radar operators scanning their screens, these drones were practically ghosts. What made this attack truly revolutionary was that these weren't just drones following GPS waypoints. They were flying a path calculated through months of intelligence gathering. Every radar blind spot, every terrain fold, every predictable pattern in Russian surveillance behavior had been mapped, analyzed, and weaponized. Western intelligence sources later told The Guardian that NATO surveillance satellites had provided atmospheric data enabling the skylines to exploit micro-pockets of radar refraction. It wasn't just technology, it was timing, psychology, and ruthless pattern analysis all combined into 4 flying machines that together cost less than 1 Russian interceptor missile. At 2:50 a.m., Russia's coastal podlet K-1 radar finally detected something, faint blips appearing and vanishing at the edge of detection range. Estimated speed, 340 to 370 mph. Altitude, extremely low. The night duty operator stared at his screen. If these had been Su-30s or MiG-31s, he would have immediately called headquarters. But the signals were weak, jittery, exactly like sea clutter or wave returns. He typed spurious target, then deleted it. That single keystroke was Russia's only chance to stop what was coming. The operator had just dismissed the death, already gliding toward 2 of Crimea's most strategic military installations. At 2:52 a.m., the 4 UJ-25s reached their pre-programmed split point. The navigation algorithms divided them instantly into 2 independent strike groups. K-1 and K-2 banked southwest toward Kacha Air Base. I-1 and I-2 turned southeast, descending toward the radar complex near Simferopol. Their flight paths were far from being straight lines. They were sharp, jagged zigzags drawn using terrain profiles, earth curvature calculations, and even the habitual on-off behavior of Russian surveillance stations observed over months of intelligence gathering. Inside a bunker near Kyiv, a young Ukrainian officer performed a final check of the deviation table. The error from optimal path, less than 3 feet. Everything was unfolding exactly as in hundreds of simulations. But could it really work? Could Ukraine truly penetrate defenses that Russia had spent billions constructing? At 12 miles from the target, Russian Air Defense Command finally realized these weren't seabirds or radar clutter. They were genuine threats appearing simultaneously from 2 directions. The commander made a split-second decision, abandoned ground radar locks and switched to track via missile mode, Russia's method for engaging very small targets that radars cannot classify. From 2 positions near Sevastopol and Simferopol, 4 9M96E2 surface-to-air missiles ignited and streaked into the night sky. Each missile cost approximately $4 million. These 9M96E2 were designed specifically to kill small maneuvering targets. capable of pulling 60 Gs and adjusting trajectory within fractions of a second. But Ukraine had anticipated this exact response. The moment the missile seekers began detecting faint reflections off the UJ-25's carbon fiber bodies, the drones executed pre-programmed evasion patterns. K-1 and K-2 simultaneously dropped altitude, diving close to the ground and forcing the missiles into extreme negative angles. I-1 and I-2 executed hard lateral turns, creating curved flight paths that overwhelmed the missile interception algorithms. The missiles tried to chase, but the constant changes in input data forced their seekers to recalculate trajectories again and again. Within seconds, all 4 missiles lost stability, shuddered, and plummeted into the Black Sea, exploding harmlessly. In less than 3 minutes, $16 million worth of Russian missiles had been defeated by targets costing only hundreds of thousands of dollars. NATO analysts watching radar feeds reportedly described it as the most cost-effective air defeat in modern history. But Russia had one final defense layer, the Pantsir S-1 systems positioned in overlapping box formations around both target areas. These weren't long-range systems relying on radar. They were close-in weapon systems designed for exactly this scenario, with 30mm autocannons capable of throwing 5,000 rounds per minute into the sky. At the Kacha axis, the Western Pantsir unit picked up K-1's weak signal and launched a 57E6 missile. The radar cross-section was so small that the system had to rely almost completely on predicted vectors. But just as the missile calculated its intercept point, K-1 and K-2 both initiated a wagon wheel maneuver. This is a move where you're spiraling while still advancing toward the target. The 57E6's seeker lost its ability to compute an intersection. The missile overshot, detonating off target with nothing more than a brief flare in the darkness. Realizing he couldn't maintain a stable lock, the Pantsir gunner switched tactics, flooding the sky with 30mm autocannon fire at nearly 5,000 rounds per minute. He wasn't aiming precisely. He was creating a dense wall of ballistic fire directly along their approach path. K-2 was struck. Its wing tore apart and it crashed onto grass a few hundred feet from the runway. But this created an unexpected problem for Russia. The shattered carbon fragments from K-2 reflected radar waves as hundreds of separate points. On the Russian radar screen, instead of 2 UAV signals, the display now resembled a cloud of noise, hundreds of false returns making it nearly impossible to distinguish the real threat from debris. K-1 exploited the confusion. Braking sharply left, it slipped through the chaos and entered striking range of the MiG-29. At 3:06 a.m., K-1's infrared feed locked onto its target. The MiG-29 sat motionless on the parking apron, its metal airframe still radiating intense heat. A perfect thermal signature revealing the contours of nose, wings, and tail. K-1 held altitude at 138 feet, speed stable at 382 mph, and switched to terminal attack mode. 3.5 seconds later, it happened. K-1 slammed into the MiG-29's left flank at hardpoint number 3. The thermite core ignited instantly, burning at 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit and melting through the airframe alloy like candle wax. The heat triggered a violent reaction inside the left wing's fuel tank, blowing the outer skin apart. A $30 million fighter, Russia's only quick-reaction interceptor at Kacha, was completely erased by a drone that cost a fraction of that amount. While Kacha burned, I-1 and I-2 were completing their own mission. At 3:10 a.m., I-1 struck the Irtish SQ radar antenna, its thermite warhead tearing through the base and causing the entire 40-foot structure to collapse onto the control cabin below. Moments later, I-2 hit the signal processing unit with a second explosion that severed power systems and data links. The lights flickered, then died completely. Russia's low-altitude eye over Crimea, the radar system specifically designed to detect threats exactly like these drones, was wiped out in seconds. The immediate tactical losses were staggering. One MiG-29 worth between $30 to $35 million, one Irtish SQ radar system worth $15 to $20 million, plus the entire weapon suite mounted beneath the destroyed aircraft. But the strategic impact was far more devastating. With the MiG-29 destroyed, Kacha instantly lost its rapid response interceptor. The aircraft kept in constant standby to scramble within minutes. Russia was forced to redeploy fighters from Saki and other bases, stretching resources thin and creating gaps across the entire southern Ukraine air defense network. According to Defense News, this realignment weakened air coverage by nearly 20% for at least 2 weeks. The destruction of the Irtish radar opened a 37 to 50-mile low-altitude gap around Simferopol. Pantsir and Tor batteries in the region no longer had targeting data. The entire network was forced to rely on distant radar stations with greater delays and less optimal viewing angles. In the chaos that followed, Russian electronic warfare units were ordered to expand jamming coverage, which only made things worse, creating interference that blinded their own systems and made it nearly impossible to distinguish real targets from false returns. With respect to the economics of this engagement, Russia fired approximately $20 million worth of missiles trying to stop drones that together cost less than $1 million. The total Russian losses, aircraft, radar, infrastructure damage, and operational disruption were all estimated to exceed $80 million. Ukraine's investment? 4 UJ-25 Skyline drones at roughly $200,000 each, plus months of intelligence gathering and mission planning. The return on investment was approximately 100 to 1. But beyond the spreadsheets and damage assessments, this operation sent a message that echoed from Crimea to Moscow to NATO headquarters in Brussels. The supposedly impenetrable air defense shield was riddled with holes, and Ukraine had proven it could methodically exploit every single one. As retired U.S. Air Force Colonel David Deptula told Reuters, this wasn't a random strike. It was algorithmic precision warfare, where speed, stealth, and cost efficiency converged to break traditional defense logic. What Russia once believed impossible had occurred in a single night. The attackers didn't just knock on the door. They'd stepped inside, destroyed 2 vital assets at the heart of Russian defenses, and left before Moscow could even understand what had happened. From that moment forward, every Russian assumption about using Crimea as a safe zone for its air force had to be reconsidered. Because the future of warfare isn't about who has the biggest military budget, but rather about who can adapt fastest, think smarter, and turn data into devastation. 4 drones, 30 minutes, $80 million in damage. The skies above Crimea are no longer safe, and Russia is just beginning to understand what that means. If you enjoyed this video and would love to do a deep dive into videos like this, check our video, Ukraine Missile Annihilates Russia's Air Fortress. Then, this happened. Link in the description below.